How's it going, everyone? Come on in. Come on into my jungle. Take a seat right in front of me on the leaf litter and the mud. Watch out for snakes or other jungle animals that might be of danger. Anyway, hope everyone's had a good week so far. Um, I I don't know if you're like me, but have any of you been watching the Olympics? I have. I like the Olympics. I like watching it. I like watching the swimming, obviously, like the running. Actually, I like all of it. There are some that are quite boring, um, but for the most part, it's pretty enjoyable. I especially like the gymnastics. I just reckon, like, and what's it called? It's not the. It's the artistic gymnastics. Yeah, that's the one. So like the rings, the pummel horse, all that crap. I like it. It's amazing. I was watching the men's one yesterday, and I was like, Jesus Christ! Some of the things that these blokes can do is just ridiculous. And because I'm sort of now starting to get into like calisthenics, which is like body weight uh, training, so I do use the like Olympic rings and stuff like that, and pull up bars and all sorts. And I'm like progressing pretty good. Like I did my first muscle up yesterday, so I was really pleased with myself. But then after watching the gymnastics yesterday, I was like, Jesus Christ! Mind you, the average height of a male gym gymnastics bloke gymnast is like 5'5". So I mean, it's kind of easier to pull up a 5'5" body than a 6'2" body, but I'm not taking anything away from them. Even if I was that height, I'm sure I couldn't do what they can do. And then I was watching the women's gymnastics this morning, and they were even better. I was like, bloody hell. Like, what the human body is capable of is absolutely mind blowing, and it's really cool. It's really fascinating. The opening ceremony, not so much. What the fudge was going on? I don't even want to get into that, but like, why? I mean, come on. Like, just why? Why be weird and I don't even want to get into it. But anyway, it freaked me out, man. Anyway, whatever. There's apparently a storm brewing here in Perth, but Perth is the city of underwhelming storms. It's like there's a severe weather warning in place, which I love. It's really cool. And then, oh, it's been downgraded. I'm like, for fuck, Jesus Christ, can't Perth do anything cool? Like, I love Perth, but come on, up your game with the weather. Jeez. Anyway, 2 weeks away is Africa. This time in 2 weeks, I will be back in Africa. I love that place. Love going back every time. It's going to be so cool. Looking forward to that. Sort of started getting some bits and pieces together. Just ordering last things I might need online and stuff. So, yeah, I'm excited. Anyway, today's episode, I reckon, is going to be cool because if you're like me, you are fascinated by giant animals. And this entire episode is about some of the largest animals that have ever existed on this planet. Now, a lot of the animals I'm going to go through are like, so I'm not going to go through, the largest snake that ever existed, the largest lizard that ever existed. I'm pretty much just going to point out some of the biggest animals that were in the ocean and on land, and maybe a couple of examples of animals that were huge in their day that you might be surprised by. For example, we've got a sloth in here that was a little bit bigger than the sloths we have today. That's just a little spoiler there. Um, and obviously, like you know, from the Ice Age back, we had animals that were just mind-blowingly huge, and there. I had to pick out just like a small list, but honestly, I could go on for the entire day about some animals, like dragonflies that lived during the Cretaceous that had like a 2 to 3 foot wingspan, things like that. There was like 6-foot centipedes wandering about. So I could go on and on and on, but I picked out a few really cool ones and interesting ones that I liked, and I think you guys will like. So obviously, we're going to start off with the blue whale. I'm just going to brief over this because it needs a mention. I did mention it in the whale episode a few weeks back. That if you don't know, the blue whale is the largest animal that has ever existed on planet Earth, ever. And it still exists today. So we got the blue whale at 33 meters long, so over 100 feet long, and 200 tons in weight. So by weight, there was no animal that has ever compared. No sauropod, which is a long-necked dinosaurs, have ever been recorded or theorized to have gotten that weight. Some longer, but not 200 tons. So I'll get the blue whale out there. The blue whale still exists, and it is the biggest animal to have ever existed. Next, we'll get into the other stuff, like the extinct stuff. So everything from here on is extinct. We got the Argentinosaurus. Now, the Argentinosaurus, guess where that was found? It was actually found in Chile. No, I'm joking. No, it was a sauropod dinosaur, so a long-necked dinosaur that was found in Argentina. And I think they have found specimens that they think is the Argentinosaurus in Chile and other countries in South America. But it was found in Argentina, the type specimen, and it died out about 95 million years ago. Now, if you watch Jurassic Park, you can see the Brachiosaurus is in there. I think the Brachiosaurus used to be called the Giraffatitan, and then they changed the name to Brachiosaurus, or they were two specimens and they combined them into one because they thought they were different. Anyway, the Argentinosaurus got way, way bigger than that, and a lot longer as well. The size estimates, because I mean, what they first found was like a tibia bone, and the tibia bone was like 8 foot long, so it's one of the leg bones. And from there, they can sort of scale it up and compare it to other sauropod dinosaurs that they found and get sort of like an idea of the size of it. And these estimates change all the time. So I go by like the most recent estimates, which is 40 meters long. So like 100 130 feet. Yeah, about 130 feet. Yeah, or just under, and about 110 tons. So that is longer than the blue whale, but nearly half the weight. So if you look at like the Brachiosauruses in Jurassic Park, they're really sort of heavy bodied. The Argentinosaurus would have been more like streamlined with a much longer tail, but more like thinner whip like tail and sort of a thinner neck, but still stupidly heavy. 110 tons is, nothing to, you know, nothing to bloody ignore. What's that? Nothing to wipe something about your nose? Nothing to, I don't know. Anyway, it's a big bloody animal. It's probably the longest animal that has ever existed, although the lion's main jellyfish apparently gets as long as a blue whale, maybe longer. But that's like just pure thin tentacles, so it's like dragging a paint tin with a 100-foot bits of string behind it. Doesn't really count, does it? So that's the Argentinosaurus. Now there are sauropods where they have estimated get close to bigger, smaller. It is crazy the amount of sauropod dinosaurs that are close to this size, and the estimates just they're all over the place. But the Argentinosaurus consistently has an estimate of this size. There are animals like the Dreadnoughtosaurus and things like that that may have gotten close to the size of the Argentinosaurus and some of the Titanosaurs. But the Argentinosaurus is it's pretty stable at this size. Next up, we have one of my favorites, and I've always been fascinated by this animal after seeing a picture of one in a book from a kid. It was like a drawing of one. and that's the I've got to pronounce this right. Paras Paraceratherium. Paraceratherium. It's basically a type of rhinoceros, but doesn't look anything like a rhinoceros. It's a hornless rhino. Um, Now, the best way to describe this animal, if you can't be bothered googling it, would be like picture a picture a rhinoceros with super long legs, a long, long neck, and like a kind of horse head on it, but it's more like elephant skin, rhino skin all over it. That's probably the best way to describe it. But this thing was bloody huge. It lived about 30 million years ago and weighed probably about the same, if not more, than four fully grown modern day African elephants. So it weighed about 30 tons and reached about 26 feet long. So nearly as long as a bus. And it stood at the shoulder, okay, at the shoulder, about 16 to 18 feet. So that's just at the shoulder, right? So its neck branching upwards, you can add another probably 4 to 5 feet to that. So let's say safely over 20 feet high. And we know that our modern day giraffes max out at about 18 feet, some maybe 20 to 21. So this thing's as tall as a giraffe, but it's not all neck. It's still its shoulder. So if you wanted to jump on the back of this thing and ride it like a horse, you would have to pretty much jump out of a two-story window to get on its back. Like it is huge. And this is like when I picture megafauna, most people will picture things like the woolly mammoth and all, huge rhinos. This is a rhino, so to speak. It's related to rhinos, but this is what I picture. It's a Paraceratherium. Um, just that's the epitome of megafauna to me because it was just a massive example, and it was probably, there is some dispute, but probably the largest animal that's ever walked on land, like apart from dinosaurs. So after dinosaurs went exist, easily the biggest, one of the biggest mammals for sure. The steppe mammoth may have gotten comparable in size and height. There is some dispute over that, but yeah, which is why I say one of the largest mammals that have ever walked on planet Earth. So that is just such a cool animal, and I do suggest googling it because it's mind blowing. Because giraffes are huge, but they're very lanky. This thing's like a filled out, beefy giraffe, rhino, elephant thing. Really cool. Now the next one is what I mentioned at the start of this episode, which is the giant ground sloth. Now, this lived obviously in South America where sloths, modern day sloths, still exist. But this thing was the size of an elephant. And it didn't really climb trees because when you're this size, you can't really get up trees. And this animal is called the Megatherium. And the largest, or one of the largest examples of Megatherium is the Megatherium americanum. This is probably the largest species of ground sloth, and it reached about 6 meters, so probably a bit over 20 feet in length, and weighed about 8,000 to 8,800 pounds, so about 4 ton. That's about the size of a full grown Asian elephant. And this was a sloth. And if you see the fossils of the just the quick of the claw of these giant sloths, just the quick, so the inside of it, like a dog's claw, is just ridiculous. It's like over a foot long, this giant claw, and that's just the inside of it. That is like maybe not even a third or a quarter of the size of what these claws actually would have been in length. Bloody enormous. And they found caves, these cave tunnel structures all throughout Bolivia and other parts of South America. And they thought originally that they were like natural caves, or they were man made, or they were like a giant, weird earthworm thing. And these caves are big enough to walk through. Like you can stand up in them and walk through them and everything. And they're insanely long. It turns out they were the holes that were dug by ground sloths. Really interesting. And some of the natives, the tribes that live in that area, kind of have passed down stories of them. They used to hunt them and things like that. It's pretty damn interesting. So yeah, giant ass sloth. How cool. I put that on the list because I was like, man, people need to know about these sloths. Gee whiz. All right, next one. Now you all know this one, the megalodon. It's a fucking megalodon. That's my Jason Statham impression. We're gonna hunt this megalodon. I'm gonna shoot it. And I'm gonna rip its eyeballs out. Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time to impersonate him. I don't know if it translated to the podcast, but anyway, the megalodon, Otodus megalodon, used to be Carcharodon megalodon, in the same genus as the great white shark, but recent studies have kind of put it into its own genus, Otodus, which is a good idea, I think. I mean, just because its teeth look like a great white shark's, except way bigger, doesn't mean it's so closely related to a great white shark. But in any case, it was huge. It had great white shark like teeth that I think the largest megalodon tooth found was like over 7 inches. Bloody enormous. And the megalodon lived between 23 and about 3.5 million years ago, is when it sort of went extinct. So the early Miocene to the Pliocene epochs. Now, the size ranges with the megalodon, like with basically all these animals, you can only really get a size estimate based on comparing it to other living sharks. And because sharks are cartilaginous, their skeletal structure is made of cartilage, it really doesn't fossilize. So, pretty much all we've found of the megalodon is the teeth. And going by the teeth and certain modeling, we can estimate its maximum length to be between 15 and 20 meters. So that's maxing out at like 65 feet. Just ridiculous, like double the length of a bus. It's insane. And it would have been a beefy, heavy bodied shark because it was preying on baleen whales, which are, the blue whale is a baleen whale, and it's the largest animal that ever existed. So it was preying on things like that. So it had to be big. It had to have a bite force that could deliver a bite that would end a whale's life. Takes a chunk out of the whale drowns or bleeds to death, and then it sort of finishes it off. So that is just, this thing eats whales, and it's the size of a whale. It's the size of a large whale. It's about the same length as a sperm whale, and probably beefier bodied as well. Bloody big sharks. Anyway, do they still exist? No, they don't. People are like, the megalodon could still exist. They found a shark that had a big bite out of it. No, it doesn't. Doesn't exist. Sorry, it's extinct. It doesn't still exist. Okay, put that out there. Next one is a dinosaur, a theropod dinosaur. Now you might be like, oh, the T-Rex. T-Rex was the biggest. No, it wasn't. It was heavy bodied and it was one of the biggest, absolutely. But there were theropod dinosaurs that certainly exceeded the length of a T-Rex. Maybe. And we're going to get into that at the end of the episode about the T-Rex and recent modeling. But anyway, we've got this Spinosaurus, and to be more specific, the Spinosaurus aegypticus. Now, guess where that was found? Morocco. No, there were fossils found in Egypt, and I think that's where the type specimen was found, hence the species name Aegypticus. But there's also been fossils found throughout Morocco and other places of North Africa. think there was Spinosaurus found in North America as well, but I'm not too sure. But there is a family of Spinosaurids which included Baryonyx and Suchomimus, but the Spinosaurus aegyptius was by far the biggest. Now, it uh, died out between 112 and 93 million years ago. But the thing that stood out about the Spinosaurus was just its sheer size, about 15 meters, which is about 50 feet in length. And some of the weight estimates put it at about 20 ton, which is insane. But sort of recent estimates have lowered that, making it more of a streamlined animal. Um, and if you look at early depictions of the Spinosaurus and what it looked like and how it's changed throughout the decades, uh, they still really haven't made up their mind what this thing looked like and what its locomotion was like. Was it fully aquatic, semi aquatic, terrestrial? Uh, the recent uh, estimates and studies kind of say that it was semi aquatic, it was a fish eater, and if you look at the shape of its skull, it's very crocodilian like. In fact, one of the other Spinosaurids, which is the Suchomimus, Suka means crocodile, mimus, mimic, crocodile mimic. Because if you look at their jaws, they're very crocodilian and obviously longer jaws for catching fish. Um, but it was a huge theropod dinosaur. And obviously in Jurassic Park 3, it killed the T Rex. When in real life, these animals would have never actually met or crossed paths. And my money would have been on the T Rex beating the Spinosaurus anyway. But yeah, the anatomy of the Spinosaurus obviously had giant 6-7 foot sail at the top of its body, hence the name Spinosaurus. And it was enormous. Whether or not it walked, some people reckon it walked like on its knuckles, like a anteater, more on its wrists actually. Others say yeah, it probably walked like a normal theropod dinosaur, but would sometimes be quadrupedal. It's very strange. We still haven't quite made up our minds about how the Spinosaurus walked. I look at the recent depictions of the Spinosaurus and I'm like, no way it looked like that. It just doesn't make sense. But I'm not a paleontologist. There are people a lot smarter and know a lot more about this stuff than I do when it comes to dinosaurs. So I'll just go with what they say. Fair enough. Next one is another, well, not dinosaur, but extinct prehistoric marine animal. Because when people think of animals like plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, they think dinosaurs. They weren't actually dinosaurs. They weren't in the same clade as dinosaurs, but they existed in the same time period. But they were just marine reptiles. Things like the mosasaur is actually closely related to monitor lizards. But we're going to talk about the Shastasaurus. Now, the Shastasaurus means the Mount Shasta lizard, and it was a gigantic marine reptile that they lump in the group of ichthyosaurs. So we all know what an ichthyosaur is. It kind of looks dolphin-like. It was an air breather, but it didn't have a dolphin-like tail fluke. It had more a shark, so a vertical tail. But it lived in the Triassic period about 200 million years ago. Now, most ichthyosaurs they found, some of them were quite large. We're talking car sized. There were some that were dolphin sized, but this one was so much bigger than all the rest. In fact, there is some debate to whether or not it was an actual ichthyosaur. They think it could have belonged to another group of dinosaurs that weren't ichthyosaurs. But it's back and forth again with these extinct animals. Where does it belong? Because this animal is huge, 21 meters or 69 feet, and about 75 ton in weight, which is so much bigger than the other ichthyosaurs. It's sort of like, how does this belong? There is an animal in this group that doesn't belong, and this is the Shastasaurus. So Who knows? It's all a matter of time when we dig up more bones and can do more studies on them. Again, it is very hard to find fossils. There are only certain substrates that are conducive of fossilization. Now, the Triassic coast, oh, is it the Jurassic coast or the Triassic? I think it's the Jurassic coast in Great Britain. They find heaps and heaps of ichthyosaur bones. It'll be the Triassic coast, surely, because that's where ichthyosaurs existed. Anyway, you can find Cretaceous ichthyosaur bones. Anyway, I digress. So ichthyosaur fossils aren't really rare. They found great ichthyosaur fossils, fully intact as well. Amazing ones, even pregnant ones with fetuses fossilized inside them. But the Shastasaurus, now I don't want to get into the weird things on Mount Shasta, UFOs, Bigfoot, people disappearing, secret time portals, uh, things like that, alien bases on Mount Shasta. But that's something for another episode. But Mount Shasta, that's where this gigantic marine reptile was found. And we don't quite know what the hell it is, but it was huge regardless. All right. Next one is the Procoptodon. Procoptodon. These are all tongue twisters. Anyway, it was a Pleistocene kangaroo. The Pleistocene was around Ice Age-ish in time period, but the Procoptodon goliah was the biggest of these extinct kangaroos. Now, they looked a little bit different to our modern days kangaroos, these Procoptodons. They had more of like a snub nose, a more shorter snout, and their group of kangaroos, they're called the short-faced kangaroos, and that's why. Anyway, we know that kangaroos can get bloody huge, the ones that exist today, like our big red kangaroos, Macropus rufus. They can get well over 2 meters tall, which is about, what, 6'7". Some of them, scraping the 7 foot mark. Now, the thing with kangaroos, when you see them just normally, they do look big. But when they stand up, they've got like two sort of stand ups. One of them, they stand up and their legs are still bent, and that's the picture most people would see with kangaroos. But then they can stand up again where they stretch their legs out and they probably add another foot or two in height. So big reds, for the majority of the time, you're like, yeah, that's huge, but it's not as tall as I am. Then it stands up and it's like your pec height on it. And you're like, Jesus Christ, this is huge. And they're jacked as well. So these ones, the Procoptodons, especially the Procoptodon goliah, stood at about 3 meters, which is scraping the 10 foot mark. It's about 9 foot and weighed between 200 and 240 kilograms, so 440 to 530 pounds. That is huge, considering our big reds, which are our biggest macropod, our biggest kangaroo that lives today, is about 200 pounds, about 90 kilograms. But that is solid muscle. So can you imagine this 9 foot kangaroo that's, 500 pounds, 200 kilos of just solid, ripped, lean muscle? You would not want to get kicked by one of those. That would kick you in half, man. Anyway, Australia had really interesting megafauna as well. We had the Diprotodon, which was basically an elephant or, well, more hippo-sized wombat. We also had Megalania, which was a monitor lizard, or we call them goannas in Australia. A monitor lizard that was like 23 feet long, so about 7 meters. Now, to put that into perspective, the Komodo dragon, which is the largest modern lizard, the largest extant lizard, living lizard, gets about 9 feet. It maxes out, maybe 10 feet at the most in length, and over 100 kilograms, with a full stomach, maybe 160. So it's still a big lizard. Now, this thing was more than double the size and probably 3 times the weight. Huge monitor lizard. That thing would eat you up pretty easily, considering Komodo dragons can make a light meal of a human. Imagine what this Megalania could have done. Anyway, that wasn't actually on my list. That was just a digression, and I thought I should mention it because it's pretty damn cool. The next one on the list. Now, this one has always fascinated me. I saw a weird art piece of this animal, and it's the Leedsichthys, which is a gigantic fish. Now, I saw this weird art piece once of this fish floating over a barn. It was just kind of trippy, but I was like, what the hell is that? I don't know why it was floating over a barn. Art, weird. Hence the opening of the Olympics, the opening ceremony. Weird art. Now this was a bony fish, so it's not really. It's not like a shark or anything. Obviously, whale sharks are huge, but they're cartilaginous fish. This was a big bony fish, and it swam in the Mesozoic seas for over 100 million years. So, from the middle of the Jurassic period to the end of the Cretaceous period, this giant fish occupied our oceans. And it was a weird looking fish. It, like, if you picture a basking shark that has its mouth open and swimming with its mouth open, it was kind of like that. It had like the big gulper mouth on it. And the size estimates on this fish, and also, like, when I look at this fish, pictures of it, it kind of looks like body shape of almost like a tarpon, very sort of just almost like, yeah, typical fish looking in shape, but huge. And the size estimates for this fish are probably the most indecisive that I've seen of any of these extinct animals, especially the ones on this list. Um, they can be as low as 9 meters, which is the size of like a full-grown male killer whale. But that was kind of debunked. That was like, no, that's ridiculous, right? They can go anywhere from 13.5 meters, so about 44 feet. But the sort of most agreed range of the size of these animals was about 26 meters. So about 80 something feet. And that is still like argued upon is this size, because there have been estimates all the way up to 35 meters, which is like 115 feet. And that's bigger than a blue whale. So in any case, minimum, and let's just throw that 9 meter estimate out, but at minimum it was 45 feet long at the bare minimum, and it probably wasn't. Okay, and I will get to the conclusion um after this one, actually, because this is the last on my list, but we're going to get into something else that will mention and sort of sum up these size estimates at the end. So, anyway, this was a gigantic fish. It wasn't a shark. It wasn't like the mola mola, like the sunfish, which is the heaviest and largest bony fish today. This was just a huge fish. When you picture fish, that's what this was, but it was the size of a whale. Okay, and it filter fed, which these big animals tend to do, especially in, well, obviously only in the ocean. Um, they, like our baleen whales, they gulp water and then pump the water over their baleen, which is the bristle-like broom structures inside their mouth, and then they're left with plankton and small organisms, and that's what they eat. Um, so that's basically the Leethixies didn't have baleen, obviously, but it filter fed much like the basking shark does today, and it was huge. Okay, now we're going to talk about the T Rex. Okay, mentioned the T Rex when we are talking about the Spinosaurus and how the Spinosaurus was bigger than the T Rex, but only recently, and we're talking the past few months, a paleontologist made a new algorithm on his computer and did some modeling, and turns out the T-Rex might have been quite a bit bigger than what the maximum estimate was. And this brings up previous estimates of these previous animals, okay? With all these animals that are on this list, even if we find heaps and heaps and heaps of fossils, that does not depict every single animal of that type. So, for example, what is the likelihood out of the probably couple billion individuals that existed on the earth, what is the odds that out of the 100 specimen fossils you found the very biggest of that 2 billion, for example? So, for example, let's talk about the T Rex. They estimate about 2.5 billion individual Tyrannosaurus Rex lived on Earth throughout the whole, 100 million years or so. That's just a guess. That T Rex walked the Earth. There was probably about 2.5 billion of them throughout that entire period. Now, we have only found about 80 specimens of the Tyrannosaurus rex, 80 specimen individuals in fossilized form. And the most complete specimen was, I think, Sue was the most complete they ever found. They called it Sue. And it was still maybe only like, I don't know, 70 or 80% of the actual skeleton was found. So, what is the likelihood out of the 80 un incomplete specimens they found, 80 out of 2.5 billion that have estimated to live, what is the likelihood that they found the biggest one that ever existed? The biggest full grown one. It is so unlikely. It's like it's ridiculous. 80, 2.5 billion. It's a massive number. Okay, so this paleontologist was like, took that into account. It's like, we have not found the largest T Rex, which I think was called Scott, was a specimen found. Call out to my brother Scott, who also likes dinosaurs. But Scott was the biggest, I believe, specimen found. But still, how do we know that that's as big as they got? We can look at growth rings, things like that, and go, yeah, okay, it was probably fully grown. But I know fully grown men that are only 5.5 feet tall. Okay? Now, if you look at humans, I think the average height for a man is between 5'9" and 5'10". An American man. Then you go up to the Netherlands, and the average height for a man is 6'1", just the average. So that's 4 or 5 inches taller than America's average, height of a man. And then you look at Robert Wardlow. I mean, Robert Wardlow was the tallest recorded man at half an inch under 9 foot, but he had a tumor on his pituitary gland, which caused an excess rate of growth hormone to be just constantly flooded. So he was not a good example. But if you look at averages, just averages, no medical acromegaly gigantism involved, just the averages across the world are so diverse and are so different. Okay. So yeah, we look at this. This is the average size of this T Rex found in this Hell's Creek formation, where we found the fossil, maxed out at about 12 and a half, 13, 14 meters. Okay. That doesn't mean it's the biggest. So basically, this new modeling took that into account and estimated that the T Rex could have been up to 70% heavier than previous estimates. That's huge. And we do know with reptiles and things like that, especially crocodiles, if you get a 5-meter crocodile and compare it to a 6-meter crocodile, it's only increased in length by a meter, but it will be double the weight of the 5-meter one, even though it's only 1 meter longer, because their girth and their body just becomes so much more enormous. So although these new estimates say that the T-Rex could have been 25% longer, it would have been 70% heavier than the previous estimates. So that would put the Tyrannosaurus Rex at a 15-ton animal and 15 feet in length, so 15 meters, which is still lighter than the Spinosaurus, but I honestly, my personal opinion, the T-Rex at 15 meters long, which is the length of the Spinosaurus aegyptius, the T-Rex was a heavier bodied animal. It would have been heavier at the same length as a Spinosaurus. But then we put this same theory into all these animals, and what do we get? Okay, we probably haven't found the largest. We found a lot of Spinosaurus fossils, especially teeth. They're not rare at all. But if we put this same formula into the Spinosaurus, that and assume we rightfully assume that we have not found the largest specimen of the Spinosaurus, then what does that do to the Spinosaurus? Does it put it at 17 meters? What does that do to all these animals on the list? And it's very safe to assume that a lot of these animals would have gotten bigger than their size estimates, because no, we have not found, by any stretch of the imagination, we haven't gotten lucky enough to find the largest specimens of these animals fossilized in the ground. All right, so it's pretty interesting. And for some reason, and it pisses me off, even though it shouldn't because it's probably accurate, uh, but you look at these giant animals and you're like, sick, this thing's huge. And then you go, oh, read some study on recent study says it was actually, there's no recent study of any of these animals that make them larger. There never is. They always make them smaller. New size estimate says it was more likely this size rather than the larger estimate. And I'm like, for God's sake, just stop ruining it for me. Stop saying these things are small. You're ruining it for me. But with this new modeling, it's cool because it does use logic and it does actually increase their maximum size estimates, which is really cool. Now, whether or not that would apply to all these animals, who knows? But it could. That's what I'm saying. It very much could. And that's really, really cool. That, yeah, even now they're big animals, but they potentially could have gotten bigger. Anyway, that's cool. And as another cool thing about the T-Rex was it probably had the best binocular vision, the best eyesight out of any animal that's ever existed. It could see you in probably great detail, something like 3 or 4 kilometers away. It could see you that far away. That's just insane. How scary is that? That this thing could watch you and know you're there, and from that distance. It had orange sized eyes and binocular vision, so its eyes were at the front of its head, as most predators' eyesight is. It's at the front. That's like a kind of like a little rule of thumb that doesn't always apply. That prey animals have eyes on the side of their head, so they can sort of see uh, sort of around them more, and predators have eyes more at the front of their head because that's used to like really hone in on their prey. So it's pretty cool. And the T Rex probably had the strongest bite force of any animal that ever existed, which is why I said it would beat the Spinosaurus in a fight, because its jaw power could bite the head off a Spinosaurus with no trouble whatsoever. Its neck muscles were just immense. And the Spinosaurus's jaws were more used for like catching prey and sort of not letting it go. It didn't really have the muscles that the T-Rex had that could bite an animal and kill it with one hit. The Spinosaurus's jaws, while still strong, like a crocodile's jaws, were used to grab prey and like fish and wriggling fish, not let him go. And hence the sort of sharper, more pointy, straighter teeth on the Spinosaurus. And then you look at crocodiles, their bite force is insanely high, and you'll be like, well, the Spinosauruses could have been that, sort of that. But our large crocodiles don't really just eat fish. They gharials do, but their jaw pressure isn't anywhere near what a saltwater crocodile's is. Gharials are crocodilians that have the real long, narrow snouts. They catch fish. But then a saltwater crocodile, once they get to a certain size, they're eating larger prey, larger mammals. They're taking livestock. They're taking kangaroos in Africa, the Nile crocodiles. They're taking wildebeest, zebra, things like that. So that's why they need that immense jaw power. They need to clamp onto an animal, take it into the water, and drown it. And the Spinosaurus, there's no evidence that it really ate animals like that. It was more eating fish, like big sawfish and things like that. Anyway, pretty interesting and pretty cool. And that is my list of giant animals that have existed on Earth. And I can do a bunch of episodes like this using other animals that were huge, because these are just ones that I arbitrarily selected. All right. There are so many more that we can get into, that I will do in the future another episode on. So, yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love huge animals, they've always fascinated me. So, I hope they fascinate you as well. Um, yeah, if you listen to my podcast and you haven't already, whatever podcast app you're listening on, give it a rating, and that's all you need to do really. Rate it, subscribe to it, and that'll help me out more than you know. It pushes it up in the algorithm, gives other people a chance to discover it. So yeah, do me a solid, do that, whenever you want. I'm not gonna force do. Nobody's got a gun to your head, man. Nobody's got a gun to your head. Or do they? Anyway, yep. Like, subscribe, 5 stars, of course, 5 stars, no less. And I hope you have a great week. Remember, we've got merch on the Biothorn website, biothorn.com.au. We've got some cool shirts, hoodies, got pouches, leather pouches that if you watched Kings of Pain, you'd see me wearing. And yeah, check it out. If not, have an awesome week, and I'll see you on another episode of Thorn's Jungle. Take care.